What if I told you that one of the most commonly diagnosed cognitive conditions of the modern age wasn't originally a disorder at all? What if it was, quite literally, an absolute superpower? Just think about it for a second. What if the exact same traits that make sitting still in a modern classroom or office feel completely excruciating today were the very traits that kept human beings alive on the ancestral savanna? Well, welcome to our explainer. Today we're unpacking a massive paradigm shift in how we understand human cognition, survival, and attention.
We are going to be diving deep into Dr. Richard Murdoch Montgomery's comprehensive work, ADHD, Disorder, Difference, Spectrum, and Human Adaptation. And trust me, we're going to completely shift your paradigm of what ADHD actually is. We aren't just looking at a list of symptoms to manage. We're looking at this through an evolutionary lens, a historical one, and a cutting-edge clinical perspective. By the end of this, you're going to see why everything you thought you knew about attention deficits might just be a symptom of the times we live in.
Chapter 1. Neither myth nor just genetics. Let's start with how society usually talks about this condition, because for decades now, we've been stuck in this really unhelpful tug-of-war. People usually fall into one of two extreme camps, and honestly, both of them are missing the bigger, much more fascinating picture.
Okay, let's dive into this. On one side, we've got biological reductionism, basically the idea that ADHD is just a broken brain, a purely genetic defect that needs to be fixed. But then, on the flip side, we have social constructionism. This is the belief that it's entirely a cultural invention, just a convenient label we slap on people who don't fit into our neat little societal boxes. But the author argues powerfully that both of these extremes are just flat out wrong. Instead, he takes this brilliant, integrative middle road. He shows that yes, ADHD is a very real clinical reality that causes genuine suffering, but it's also a natural variation in human functioning. And depending on the environment you're in, it's not always a disadvantage. Chapter 2. The Sentinel Hypothesis. To truly grasp this middle road, we need to rewind the clock a bit. We've got to look back at our evolutionary past to figure out exactly where these highly unique cognitive traits, like rapid attention shifting and intense vigilance, actually came from in the first place.
So here is the Sentinel Hypothesis. The core idea here is that the traits we label as ADHD today, things like impulsivity, that constant scanning of the room, or having a super low threshold for noticing new stimuli, these were actually massive survival advantages back on the ancestral savanna. Think about it. Imagine living in a small hunter-gatherer tribe, where missing a single threat, like a predator lurking in the brush, literally meant sudden death. Having a few people in your group who were just constantly vigilant, who reacted instantly to vague cues before anyone else even registered them, that was an unbelievable asset. They were the group's sentinels.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the math behind it all. Because you're probably wondering, right? If it was such an amazing evolutionary advantage, why doesn't every single person have ADHD today? Well, evolutionary math, specifically something called frequency-dependent selection, perfectly explains this. The advantage of being a sentinel actually peaks when those traits are relatively rare in the population. If everyone is a hypervigilant sentinel, the whole society breaks down because nobody is doing the slow, focused, deliberative work. But when about 3 to 4% of the group has these traits, boom, it creates the perfect protective balance for the whole tribe. And that is exactly why this specific genetic signature has stuck around across millennia.
Chapter 3. The Clash with Modernity. Now this obviously brings up a huge question. If this was such a brilliant advantage for our ancestors, why has it caused so much functional impairment today? Why are modern clinics full of people seeking help for it? Well, the answer isn't that our brains fundamentally broke, it's that the world around us fundamentally changed. Look at this crazy contrast. Back in our ancestral environment, humans needed mobility, constant exploration, and lightning-fast reactions. The sentinel trait absolutely thrived there. But look at our modern environment. It is sedentary, it's highly bureaucratic, it is deeply repetitive. We've essentially created a massive evolutionary mismatch. The baseline biological trait, that hasn't changed at all. But we've taken the hunter out of the savanna and forced them to sit at a desk staring at spreadsheets for 8 hours straight. And let's be honest, that is definitely not what human biology evolved to do. The very trait that kept the whole tribe alive is now being actively penalized by a world that demands rigid, unchanging focus on digital screens.
And this brilliantly illustrates the clear historical correlation here. As we transition from active hunter-gatherer lifestyles to modern sedentary knowledge work, you can see the explosion of ADHD diagnoses tracking right alongside the sheer number of hours we spend sitting down every week. As our bodies got more and more stagnant, I mean, we're hitting nearly 80 hours a week of sitting now. Diagnosis rates just skyrocketed. We're literally watching a biological adaptation collide head-on with a sedentary society.
Chapter 4, the safe diagnosis triad. Now, understanding all this evolutionary history is incredibly validating, for sure, but the author makes a very crucial point. Knowing the past does not absolve us of the need for rigorous medical assessment today. Just because a trait was super useful in the Pleistocene era doesn't mean a patient isn't experiencing real distress right now. So, how do clinicians accurately and safely diagnose this today?
To get a secure diagnosis, clinicians rely on a triad. A truly responsible assessment doesn't just rely on a single quick test or a 10-minute chat. It needs the convergence of 3 intersecting pillars. A genuinely safe diagnosis lives exactly where these 3 specific clinical tools overlap in the center.
So the crucial point is how these 3 elements balance each other out. First up, we have sovereign amnesias, which is the patient's deeply personal history and life story. This is, and always will be, the absolute foundation. Second, we use structured psychometrics to compare a patient's performance against standard population norms. And third, this is the really cutting-edge part, objective EEG biomarkers. This brings in hard biological data, measuring actual brainwave patterns. The very best clinicians balance all 3 of these. They blend the hard, objective biology with the deeply personal lived human experience.
Chapter 5, medicine guided by suffering. Which brings us to our final concept. Once we have that secure, multi-layered diagnosis, what do we actually do about it? If it's a natural human difference, do we even intervene? Well, the author champions a highly personalized approach here, focusing on what he calls medicine guided by suffering.
Let's move to and see how this builds into a model for true precision medicine. Because we have these objective biological markers now, like being able to see on an EEG whether a brain is under-aroused or over-aroused, doctors don't have to guess. They can use targeted decision trees to totally individualize medical protocols. It's completely moving away from that old one-size-fits-all approach. For example, an under-aroused brain might respond best to a specific first-line stimulant, whereas an over-aroused brain might need a non-stimulant or a completely different dosing strategy. We are actually treating the specific biological reality of the individual person.
But the golden rule underneath all of this is perfectly captured right here. Medication is reserved for those who need it due to substantial suffering and impairment, not as a petty restriction, but as an appropriate engagement. I love this because it means we are treating the functional impairment and the actual lived suffering. We absolutely do not medicate just to squash a natural biological difference or to force someone to conform if they aren't actually suffering. It is a fundamentally empathetic standard of care.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final, kind of provocative thought. We've seen that ADHD has these deep roots as a critical ancestral survival advantage. But it's become this profound source of friction in our heavily bureaucratic, sit-at-a-desk-all-day modern world. And yes, rigorous clinical treatment and precision medicine are absolutely vital for helping people who are suffering right now. But think about this. If we actually change the design of our modern environment, if we rethought the way we structure our schools, our workplaces, our daily expectations, how much of this disorder would simply disappear? It's a huge question, and it really challenges us not just to fix the individual, but to rethink the entire world we've built for them. Thanks so much for diving into this fascinating subject with me.